Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Bassett.
And I'm Catherine Logan.
And welcome to the Sports Docs podcast. On each episode, we chat about the most recent developments in sports medicine and dissect through all the noise so you know which literature should actually impact your practice. Today, we're coming to you live from the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine annual meeting in Denver, Colorado.
The AOSSM meeting is a premier sports meeting conference each year, hosting over 3,500 attendees with hundreds of poster and paper presentations, exhibitors, and instructional course lectures. This year proved to be as spectacular as years past. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to catch up with many of the presenters at the meeting and get their take on some of the hottest topics in sports medicine.
Over these 8 episodes, we're going to be exploring some cutting-edge sports medicine with these experts who are presenting at the AOSSM annual meeting. MEAC Orthopedics is leading a shift in the treatment of anterior cruciate ligament tears, from reconstruction to restoration with the Bair implant. Bridge-Enhanced ACL Restoration facilitates healing of the torn ACL. Unlike reconstruction, the Bair implant does not require a second surgical wound site to remove a healthy tendon from another part of the leg or the use of a donor tendon.
The Bair implant acts as a bridge between the two ends of a torn ACL. The surgeon injects a small amount of the patient's own blood into the implant and inserts it in between the torn ends of the ACL in a minimally invasive procedure. The combination of the Bair implant and the patient's blood enables the body to heal the torn ends of the ACL back together while maintaining the ACL's original attachments to the femur and tibia. The Bair implant is resorbed by the body as the ACL heals.
To learn more about the Bair implant, including clinical study results and instructions for use, visit www.bairimplant.com. Today's episode is going to focus on the Level 1 clinical trials evaluating the Bridge-Enhanced ACL Repair, or BEAR, including an update from the ongoing multicenter RCT, the BEAR Moon trial. We are joined today by 2 outstanding guests.
Dr. Brett Owens is a professor of orthopedic surgery at the Brown University Alpert Medical School, chief of sports medicine at Miriam Hospital, and the director of the Rhode Island Cartilage Repair Center. He is also a team physician for the Providence Bruins and the Brown University Athletics.
Dr. Kurt Spindler is a professor of orthopedic surgery at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine, director of clinical research and outcomes at the Cleveland Clinic in Florida, and a past president of AOSSM. He has also served on numerous NFL committees, including the Safety Council and the Research and Innovation Committee.
So, without further ado, let's go to the exhibit hall. So welcome to the show. Today we're really excited to have Dr. Brett Owens and Dr. Kurt Spindler. So Brett and Kurt, thank you for joining us for this special episode of the Sports Docs podcast live at AOSSM in the Fieldhouse in Denver. So welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about Bridge-Enhanced ACL Repair, or BEAR. So the BEAR technique, you both are familiar, obviously, with it, is a surgical alternative to ACL reconstruction in which suture repair is combined with a specific extracellular matrix scaffold termed the BEAR scaffold. That's placed in between the torn ends of the ACL and activated with the patient's blood. So last year at AOSSM, we recorded with Dr. Sean Anthony, and that episode was episode 40 for our listeners who want to check that out. And that episode focused on primarily surgical indications, surgical techniques, and the little bit of clinical outcomes we had. So today we want to primarily focus on those clinical outcomes. Before we do that, though, we want to talk a little bit about why we should be considering repair over reconstruction. So, Brett, why should people be considering ACL repair over reconstruction? A lot of people say, my reconstructions are doing well. Why should they change?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, the first intuitive reason that it resonates with folks is the lack of need for a graft. So the absence of graft harvest morbidity is probably the greatest advantage that we see with this. It also resonates with patients. They definitely want the concept of repairing your ligament definitely makes sense, and we have a lot of people excited about the concept of a BEAR. But the biggest thing I would think would be the not having a need for graft harvest.
Absolutely.
It also makes revision reconstruction, should you ever need it, much simpler. So your revision, you still have your grafts available, and you could always undergo a reconstruction that is very similar to a primary and not dealing with all the tunnel issues. Right. Now, the other advantages you have, where the anatomy is. You have anatomic location. We spent all our time at all these meetings for how many decades discussing where to put the tunnel, where do we, how do we get there, how do we do, what kind of, here we know the anatomy, we're repairing it back the way it's supposed to be.
Yes. And Kurt, it looks like you want to chime in?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's also, we're always trying to improve what we do. ACL reconstruction is not perfect. It's a good operation, has good durability, but there are some things that we know when we reconstruct, we don't recreate the normal biomechanics and neuromusculars. And if you think about the tibial footprint, it's a very broad, like your hand. It's not a single tunnel. So by doing repair, you're able to preserve that footprint. You're able to preserve some of the nerve fibers there, and if you get it to heal, there are theoretical things that have to be tested, but you could get a more anatomic functioning knee. And then there's some unique things in the animal models that show it's a little less post-traumatic arthritis or damage to the cartilage, and we don't know how they translate over that. So besides the initial things that Brett said, you don't have to harvest anything, and all those other things, you have some theoretical advantages that could improve ACL surgery.
Right.
Absolutely.
And historically, the ACL repairs, it was just suture, and there was no sort of scaffold that was be putting in. So we at the table are all familiar with how the Bair implant works, but not everybody listening has a good understanding. So Kurt, can you just talk a little bit briefly about the science of how the implant works?
Yeah, the science, I was very fortunate to work with Martha a little bit early on in it. And so the science is really that there is no provisional scaffold that forms between the two ends of the ligament that tear apart midstream. This is not trying to repair the ligament back to bone. This is for basically mid-substance tears that have enough of a tibial footprint. So in order to get that to heal, if you just put sutures in, it won't heal because there's no provisional scaffold. So what this does is establish a collagen-based scaffold that allows it to be the substitute for the fibrin clot that allows all the healing and the cells to come in and the growth factors to come in order to reconstruct scarring and reconstruct that ligament.
Great overview.
Yeah. So now let's get into the clinical outcomes that we promised our listeners we would talk about. So, Brett, there have been numerous trials thus far that have been done looking at the Bair implant.
Sure.
Could you give our listeners an overview about what those individual trials were looking at, and then ultimately what was able to be concluded from that science?
Sure. So I'm very lucky in that when I moved to Brown in 2015, I was able to participate in some of the animal trials still. So I did these in mini pigs. So I felt very comfortable when the opportunity came around to participate in the human trials. But all the early work was done at Boston Children's Hospital under the direction of Martha Murray and the surgeons there. And the first was a small cohort of first in human trial, and at least showed definite safety. The next trial was a RCT comparing against primarily hamstring grafts, but I think there is one BTB in there, but it's primarily hamstring grafts, around 30 in each group, and it did not show a significantly increased risk of failure with superior PROMs. I mean, the beauty of the Bair is that the patient-reported outcome scores are always clearly superior because primarily due to the graft harvest. Eventually that we see it over a longer time how those will stand up, but definitely early on we definitely see higher PROMs. The concern everyone has is does it stand up? Are we going to see a higher failure rate? And we've not seen that in the early studies. I was lucky enough to participate in Bair 2, which is a cohort trial. The trial continues to grow, and they've really it's kind of expanded to multiple sites. It started with Children's and us at Brown, but now it's gone to multiple different sites. So it's kind of continued as a cohort trial, and that data has not been published. During this time, that's when we began the time to plan for the Bair Moon trial, which I know we want to talk about here today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so perfect segue. So the Bair Moon trial is currently ongoing. It's comparing Bair to the gold standard patella tendon, autograft or BTB. So Kurt, you're obviously very involved in this. Can you share a little bit about bringing this project to light and where you are now?
Yeah, so in the beginning, when we started this, the implant wasn't FDA approved. And so this study is an NIH IDE study, Investigational Drug Device Study. It still is, to look at the comparison, but the FDA has approved it because it does work and it's shown safety, and we have some studies on it. So the goal of this trial is to really compare it in a rigorous fashion. And so in this fashion, we tightly control the patients have to be, and surgeons have to be really involved in it. We actually make them classify the size of the stump in the OR. So the patient is scheduled for the study, doesn't know what they're going to get, and they're blinded to it, which is difficult. Mm-hmm. And then they make the surgeons in the OR say, okay, this stump has to be a certain criteria. They have to have enough of a footprint, so it's worthwhile to do. And then it gets randomized in the OR. So you have really strict inclusion criteria. You know exactly what you're defined, what you're doing, and then post-operatively, all the assessments that are measured, patient reported is patient reported with the patient, but all the other physical examination and the KT are done by blinded examiners that don't know which knee it is, and so you're really trying to say, how does this stack up, and how does this compare to a BTP autograft, at least as far as the primary outcomes, which are stability, KT 1000, and also how does it stack up in your IKC, your patient-reported outcome measures. So you're really looking for comparisons, and then you're looking to see the secondary measures in the end. What drives those differences?
Yeah. And are you able to share what we're learning right now, and trends that we're seeing? I know it's not all completed.
Yeah. So what we can say, no one can see the data except for one statistician, not even me. That's the PI. But we do know the aggregate data because the average age is 28, and the average mark score is 12. So these are good, active recreational athletes. A nice test. We don't have people under the age of 18 in it, in that group, and we also can look at the. We've only had 2 repeat operations in the whole context of the surgery. Now people are different. Some people have finished 2 years. Some people are 18 months, and so we've had pretty good compliance, and we've not seen a lot of issues that we report to. We've seen no infections in the whole group, fortunately.
Excellent.
Which is good. So we can say that we've not seen any. There's so few problems that it won't matter which group it's in.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, as far as your patients, like that you can sort of say anecdotally?
Yeah, I mean, I've being part of Bear 3 trial. We have patients. I have patients that are out 6 years now.
Yeah.
That are doing great. I had a couple of teenagers that are graduating from college and are off doing. I end up seeing them for other stuff. They come in with the other ankle or the other knee or something. And but no, patients have done really well. I mean, Bear it's a little different, right? I think we were talking a little bit earlier. I mean, it is a little bit of a leap for surgeons. I'm primarily a patellar tendon graft surgeon. It definitely, there's a lot of skepticism out there about it, and I understand that because I went through that as well. I think, granted, I was at a center where we were able to do it in mini pigs, and all the data was coming out, and it's very exciting to do. But it is a little bit of a leap for a surgeon that wants to, put that graft in, do a Lockman, high five the assistant, right, and then early on, every time you're seeing it, you're doing that Lockman. It's a biologic healing, and so you have to. It's a little bit different when you leave the operating room. You're in full extension, right, and you're not checking your Lockman right there. You keep them in extension through at the beginning. So it's a little bit of a leap for surgeons, but I think when you see it with your own eyes, you're like, wow, it's fantastic. Also, being part of those Bear cohort trials, I was able to see the MRIs as well. So you see your MRI of your patient at 9 months with that beautiful looking ligament, just the way they were born. It's amazing.
So you had talked about how the study is kind of guiding your indications, right? It's over the age of 18. It has to have specific criteria. Prior to this study, when you were not enrolling clinically, what were your indications? Were you doing younger patients? Are you staying away from them? If so, why? What are your thoughts?
No, I mean, all the work at Boston Children's included, adolescent patients. And so I think sometimes they can have the best outcomes. I understand that it certainly is, they're the highest demand patients, and that's obviously the concern. But there's some real great advantages for pediatric patients. You don't have to worry about the physes. Right, and so it really. I've done a bunch of teens, and they do very well. And so, obviously, compliance is a little bit of an issue. The rehab is a little bit slower at the beginning, and so, you definitely have to have some concern about compliance. But I think the indications are there early on for surgeons starting this. You probably want to, early in their practice, they're probably going to want to look for those, proximal peel-offs that will have a great stump. As you begin, in our trial, we're much more open to, the mid-substance repairs, but it can be tricky if you don't have a stump that is, can hold stitch, right? You don't want to get in there ready for a Bear, and then all of a sudden you can't. You can pass the stitches, but it's not holding. The quality of the tissue stinks. So.
Yeah, you really want to. It'll be interesting to see over time whether the actual amount of stump left, because that's the hard part of it, is a factor. And I would bet you that when we look at the busiest surgeons, that over time that there's going to be a relationship that as they get more comfortable with it, they have to be able to say that it holds stitch, that they'll probably do more shorter stumps over time.
Agreed.
But we can actually check that and look at that. So, but when you're running a trial, and a big trial, I mean, if I have a relatively new device, or I have a relatively new procedure, do I really want, or if I have a new tire, do I really want to test it on IndyCar 500 races? That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You want it because you want to perfect it. This is 1.0, and so you really want to put it into a population. And 70% of our ACLs that we do, at least in the Moon cohort, are people that are really over 18 and that are recreational athletes. So we put it right in the sweet spot of that cohort, which also compliance is important, right? People have to be able to listen. There's not that immediate stability, as you know. Patient, you have to say, this patient's not going to listen to me. No. So the patient has to be compliant with some of their range of motion restrictions and so forth. And the same thing about going back to play. I mean, there's a healing construct here that starts off at almost no strength. So, and you're going to have a bell-shaped curve on healing. So if they go back at 6 months and they're a slow healer, that's a problem. That's why, so in the trial, we wanted everyone to be 9 months. I know if you put it in a high school kid and they have to go back at 7 months to play their senior year of sports, you know what's going to happen. They're going to go back and play.
I would argue the same really with the traditional ACLR.
Sure.
I'm not putting those people back early either, because I just think, it's just, I think we've learned that lesson multiple times. And we talk about this a lot in the podcast, where both ACL is a huge part of our population, and we spend a lot of time talking about return to sport testing, and prolonging those sort of things. So I really don't treat them at that phase any different.
OSSR prides itself on creating effective, non-invasive bracing solutions focused on orthopedic, osteoarthritis, and injury care. With a long-standing commitment to serving medical professionals and collaborating with leading orthopedic research institutions, OSSR maintains a strong service ethic, addressing the diverse needs of their customers.
Their globally recognized brands such as CTI, Rebound, Miami, and Unloader are designed to improve mobility and enhance quality of life. The Unloader 1 knee braces are clinically proven to alleviate osteoarthritis pain, while their Injury Solutions line aids in the recovery from fractures, ligament injuries, and postoperative treatments. Recognized as a technology pioneer by the World Economic Forum, OSSR advocates for life without limitations, partnering with individuals, clinicians, and communities worldwide to enhance millions of lives. But the other thing we haven't touched on that is also really important is the psychological scores.
Sure.
So I think that's super interesting. Tomorrow I'll be pitching for my Playmaker grant application, and it's all based on the psychological aspects of the return to sport. So it's definitely a little bit of like my passion project. And what I really like about the Bear is that the scores ahead of time, people are feeling more like themselves. Their psychological scores are higher. I think as someone who sees a lot of young females, and I know Ashley does too, that's super important. So can you speak,
Sure.
either of you or Brett? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and that gets back to all those advantages of not harvesting the graft, as well as, like Kurt mentioned, with the proprioceptive fibers that are inherent with the ligament that you're not taking away. So I think that has a huge advantage potentially for this.
Yeah, the only thing you have to be cautious of, remember, you're going to when allografts were done, they felt better really quickly, right?
Exactly.
But the construct is not healing faster in an allograft; it's slower. And so in here, the problem is it's great that they feel better, and it's great the recovery is better, but we need a better measure other than time and other than functional tests to say how strong is that. We need to be able to better quantify with an MRI and saying this is strong enough. And therefore, and that's a big cohort study in the future. Yeah. Cohort studies say we're going to MRI everyone at 6 months, and then we're going to do their testing, and we'll see if there's any correlation with weaker grafts or how that healing really occurs. So it's great to have the psychology, but also if you think about, if you think about adaptations of the technology, why can't you deliver it arthroscopically, right? You probably can. We can't do that in an FDA trial because you can't do that. And why can't you use a different sort of bridge per se? Of course you can. Those things need to be tested, and if you could do it arthroscopically with a different bridge, maybe the rehab changes. Right. And then you may be able to do it with incisions that look like an arthroscopy, and And then now you have a lot less pain, right? And if we have a lot less pain afterwards, our recovery's better, our psychology's better. We may not have to use as narcotics. That's why when we designed the trial, we designed it to be in that sweet spot of the population, 70%, and not to take a lot of risk.
Yeah.
And to say, okay, because this is step one, and it should be able to improve from there.
Now, Kurt, you just talked about how you kind of foresee this procedure evolving over time. Certainly, the procedure has evolved since its inception and when you maybe first did it. Can you talk a bit about how your surgical technique has progressed? I know obviously it's probably standardized now with the clinical study, but what did you start with, and now kind of what are you doing? Or Brett?
Yeah, because of the trial, we
We
do the bear as originally described, and so there's a mini arthrotomy to get the sponge or the product in, and it's pretty, and with all the with everything that's originally described, Vicryl and Ethibond for the internal splint. It's exactly the way it's been described by Dr. Murray in the previous reports.
As Martha said, if we can figure out to heal, there's a lot of smart people out here that can modify the technique to get it done. But you can't do that you can't do that in any trial. You certainly can't do that. All the data is reported to the FDA. All the data is reported to the Safety Monitoring Board, and so in the NIH, and so you really can't change in the middle of it.
Yeah, and it would be much easier, technically, to do it arthroscopically. There are steps involved because you eventually do it open, and I think, but technically it's not demanding. I think, especially for if you can fix a cuff.
Faster.
Yeah, if you can fix a cuff through the camera, you can easily do a bear. I mean, it really is. It's obviously there's some steps you have to go through to make sure you're ready for that. Basically have everything all set. Buttons passed, everything ready kind of for your arthrotomy. But everything's done arthroscopically. I mean, you're passing your sutures through your stump, and everything's done arthroscopically. So.
Some of the other things the trial allows you to do is that you're allowed to test. You can test ancillary things added on. So one of the things that you'd really like to know is that is bear, does it have a better neuromuscular function or not? And in a trial, you have two groups, and they are psychologically the same. The beauty of randomization is that there are things that you can't control and don't know, meaning how people think and their expectations, and that's randomized across the group. So when you then add on, and Brett and Jill Beveridge have a study to look at the neuromuscular function compared the bear to the BTP patients, you have a great study, and then you can add on and get an MRI at 4 years and say, okay, well, what does the articular cartilage look like?
Sure.
So by having that initial randomized group, you then allow it to do many other things that you could do with that, and it's not wasted. You learn so much from it.
Where do you see, next steps for study?
Well, we're close. We need another 25 patients to close enrollment. Then we just have to wait out 2 years, which is going to be painful involved in that. So I think it's really to just, for us, is to finish the enrollment, which we'll finish in the next few months, and then to maintain contact and follow up with that, and then also to think about what are the things that we'd really like to know, right?
Right.
Can we look at post-traumatic arthritis with MRI? And the answer is yes, but that requires more funding. And then we're all going to look at neuromuscular. Brett's going to look at that there. And so we'll learn so much, and to see how this relates to ideally improving ACL surgery.
And Brett, can you share a little bit about the neuromuscular, your plan?
Sure. So we're taking a cohort of one of the centers at our site. So it's a smaller subset, but we're Jill Beveridge, a PhD in our lab, does a great job. She's just got an R01 on this to look at the kinematics afterwards in these patients. So we have to get a CT scan to be able to correlate that with the dual X-ray, but there's a really high frequency dual X-ray apparatus that we have, and then we run them through a standard lower extremity assessment, and then we're able to correlate that with the CT scan, and then be able to three-dimensionally examine their kinematics. And again, with the known cohort is great because you're not just you know they're randomized, but you also know their outcome scores. You know a lot about them, so it's going to be exciting. And again, this is just in one of the sites, so it'll be a smaller number. But we could, in theory, extrapolate those to look at the other sites as well. So I mean, like Kurt said, there's a lot of potential future studies that you can do to look at this. The most exciting thing, obviously, would be in addition to neuromuscular, would be look at OA. I mean, That's the real question.
And I think the frontier, we've been trying to touch on this. The frontier is not so much mechanical as it is the biological effects. What happens to the knee, inside the knee, with inflammation, with chondrocyte death, and so forth. And so I think this is one of the ways of getting involved in the biology of the knee and understanding what's going on in making it better. And I think there's a lot of stuff we really just don't understand. And I think this is a step forward to studying it. And I think every study design has something. Cohorts are really valuable. Patient experience, all people looking at it is really valuable. And randomized, they all have their role to play in assessing what you should do for your patient.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we do want to ask a little bit about the rehab, which, again, given the clinical trial, it is standardized. So can you speak a little bit about what the postoperative protocol looks like? How long are they walked out straight if they are? What is the range of motion parameters? How are you progressing them?
It's a three-step process. So we don't want to get them past 90 into 6 weeks. So they have braces on. They're supposed to be locked out straight. Remember, if you lose extension after any knee surgery, you're in trouble. It's a bad function.
Yeah.
We know that. So you gotta have
Talk about
extension.
it.
And the biggest thing that we've seen is that we scared the therapists. I did. Tell them they got to follow exactly what it was. So they were too cautious. And so now we say, look, when it says 0 to 30 in the first 2 weeks, I want you to get 30 right away. I don't want you to wait to the end of 2 weeks because the grafts healed. I mean, the scaffolds are it has a biological effect when mixed with blood, and they heal differently. People heal differently, so you got to get your motion back. So really, it's a matter of 0 to 30 for 2 weeks, 30 to 60, and then 60 to 90 in 2-week increments. Then they go into a functional brace when they can walk, and that requires some compliance. Now, we don't know if that's the optimal, but we can't change it, right?
Exactly.
In fact, if you ask people in practice, they probably could tell you better than we can because they're able to look at that and modify that.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I agree. No, and I know MIAC is following the commercial patients because I know there are some different protocols out there, and again we are fixed with our protocol, and they are different because you can't manage a BTB in that way. And the good news is our patients don't know the difference, right? Because they're just told what to do by the website. So it's great for them.
The other thing I will add, as a former physical therapist, is nobody's protocol is the same no matter what your procedure is. So it's just like you'd have, this is Dr. So-and-so's, this is Dr. So-and-so's, and everybody's is a little bit different. It all has its own little spice, and it, so I think.
Well, ours is standardized, at least for this trial. And that
Yes.
But
the point is we're still learning.
We're still learning, and the bottom line is, if you think the patient does exactly what you think they're going to do,
Agreed.
I'm not so sure that's true. And the VTBs are different, though.
Yeah.
The VTB is a standard because you can't. We had a big debate about that. You can't take. You can't, if you're going to be restrictive, you can't make BTBs worse because we know that. We can't go back. And at the same time, you can't subject the healing process to really aggressive. It doesn't work. So the rehab, all those things will modify with time. But we're sort of stuck when we put it in the ground.
Yeah.
Is BFR a part of the rehab, or is that out because all the advancements are out because you had to keep it bare bones, right? Just to keep it,
Yes,
Okay.
I mean it's standardized right now, and we don't have BFR as part of it.
That makes sense.
I think that if someone wants to use, so if someone has quad dysfunction, right? We would not restrict someone from using electric stim or BFR. We would let them, but it's not a standard part of it.
It's not in the
so
protocol.
So if you're not getting your quad function, you need to do everything you can do to get that quad function back. And so if you think in a randomized trial, it would happen equally amount, maybe in both.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we're just going to close with, just hearing a little bit more about like where you see next steps are once this trial closes. Obviously, you're going to follow for 2 years. There's the neuromuscular study. Or, anything else? Where do you see, this implant going? Is it going anywhere else besides the knee? Like anything else that you guys are excited about?
I mean, I think it is exciting when we look at this. I mean, right now, the early adopters are doing bears, right? But there's a lot of ACLs and ACL surgeons that are not going to adopt until they see more data, and that's what the beauty of this trial is, and really to give us some real quality data against the gold standard. And I think you may see a big change after that. people really wanting to try it for all the reasons that we talked about. Again, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of ACL reconstruction. There will always be a role for that, right? And we all see patients that come in beyond that initial window, or chronic ACLs or revisions, et cetera. So I don't think it's ever going to supplant that completely, but I think it's definitely, the trial. We're excited about the trial, and I think that may change a lot of opinions.
I think, if we had the ability to get MRIs on, quantitative MRIs on them at 4 years, 2 years is too early. No one's going to buy that. But if we had the ability to bring them back at 4 years and get quantitative MRI and an exam on them and see that there are differences, if there are major differences in the articular cartilage of what you see, then that would be another game changer. So it just takes time to follow that. But I also think there are many things that can happen in the real world out in practice that can say this rehab process works, or we have adopted it arthroscopically and we can do it this way, or we've done that. So I think there's a lot of things that can happen to improve the technology and improve outcomes for our patients.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for joining us here today. This was an awesome discussion. We learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners did as well, too. So please enjoy the rest of your meeting and take care.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you both. This was
Appreciate
great.
it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sports Docs podcast. We hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and on YouTube to stay up to date on all things sports medicine. If you like what you hear, please consider leaving us a review or comment. You can also reach us by email at thesportsdocspod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at thesportsdocspod. We love hearing from you.